Hello guys, welcome to the last talk of the day. So we're here with Dr. Jonathan Quinn from Reach Robotics, and he's going to be talking to you today about his companion down here with his talk on games and robots. So yeah, off you go, buddy.
Well, I thought this might be a bit of a graveyard shift at the end of the day, so I spiced up my title a bit and just used 2 words and a couple of exclamation marks. I'm not sure it's really had the desired effect, but we'll see how it goes. I'll try and be fairly quick so we can all go and drink Epic's booze. But in the meantime, I'm John, and I'm going to talk to you today a bit about making games with actual robots. So objectively far less useful than all the other nice talks you've had this afternoon about how to get like jobs and careers and improve your portfolio and stuff. I'll just be talking about some cool stuff about robots, hopefully. So you can probably see here, I have a robot on the floor, this gives you a brief introduction to what the actual product is. Obviously, this just here is just me walking it around. But what I'm going to try and focus on in this talk is like how we actually build games and experiences around this. Okay. So, cheeky little intro video here. I don't know if there's any sound. I don't know if it comes through. It comes from my laptop, apparently. Maybe I can change that. No, not now. So this is a trailer, one of the trailers we made for a release we actually did about 2 weeks ago, and I'll tell you more about that in a sec. Hopefully no one has epilepsy, because there we go. So, brief little introduction to the product there. So what I'll try and do is tell you a little bit about the company, a little bit about the product, and then a bit about how we make games and how we've tried to make games and interesting experiences for the product. So we were founded, I think, in 2013. So, I think there's a bunch of people, well, probably some people from the company watching this on the stream. I didn't realize there was a live stream. Obviously, I had to go through the deck and cut out all the slides where I slag all my team off. But I think the company was founded in about 2013 by Silas, our CEO. When I joined, I was like the 5th employee, so there were 4 founders, and I joined. We were working out of a room which had 4 desks in it, no windows, and was generally pretty horrible. We were living the startup dream. We went to a pretty cool Techstars accelerator in San Diego. So Techstars is one of the big sort of 2 accelerator programs, Y Combinator and Techstars. And they do these things where they partner up with a huge company, in our case Qualcomm, and they invest a bunch of, Qualcomm invests a bunch of cash in the company. And you go to this accelerator where you get like mentoring and technical assistance and things like that for like 3 to 5 months, depending on the type of product. So we did like 100-hour weeks for 5 months there, which was pretty brutal. But we came away with a prototype for the robot and a prototype for the app. Since then, so we came back and raised money based on that. On those prototypes, which was quite cool. It's a pretty of an unusual product in the UK. And since then, we've raised about 10 million US. We have now 60 employees-ish, 59, I think, in Bristol in the UK. And we sell this product in, maybe you've seen it, in Apple stores in the UK and the US. And this year, like as of about a week ago, we now sell them globally in Apple stores. So you can walk into it, as far as I know, like any Apple store pretty much around the world, and pick up a robot and demo it and try that out. In about 2 weeks, we're launching on Amazon and other boutique stores around the world. So that's pretty cool. Obviously, I gave you a brief demo, and there's a little animation of it walking. It's a bit janky that this actual presentation slide doesn't loop it correctly, so there's a frame pause, which annoys the shit out of me, but I couldn't get rid of it. So 4-legged robot. What a bullet point when you've seen the robot. Really useful. So we built this robot, and it was really like a thing of passion for the CEO. We built it for entertainment, gaming, and education. So we built it just to be a really interesting, fun robot, and entertainment really being the primary drive there. So we've done all the engineering and development work in Bristol, and the only thing we do outside there really is manufacture in Shenzhen in China. When my wife saw this slide, she thought it was slavery. It's definitely not. It's definitely a pretty cool factory in China, building loads of robots. And you can see loads of robots on a pallet. It's exciting, isn't it? So what the CEO really wanted to do, not only is build this entertaining robot, but to give it a lot of character and personality. So with this latest release, as I said, we sort of did a release about 2 weeks ago. And it's got loads of character now, so it builds up character the more you play with it, reacts differently to things. You know, when you just connect to it, it sort of waves at you. And we're really focused on making that, continuing that experience. So, how do we sort of build a product around this and make it compelling? It's completely bespoke. Everything inside it is built or designed by us. The whole app is built and designed by us. So we did all the work in-house, and we tried to do this completely, really tightly integrated product. So everything from the robot to, I've got them on a slide here, that's nice. From the hardware to the firmware that sits on the robot, to the app, to the experiences within the app, and to the web services. We've designed sort of all in parallel and all to work really tightly to provide this really interesting, compelling product. The idea is that people should care about it, they should want to use it whenever possible, and it's not just some crap they buy at Christmas, they turn on Christmas Day, and on Boxing Day it just sits on the shelf. Still looks cool, I guess, so that's something, and we sold them a robot, but it's not the sort of engagement we want. So here's a nice figure of it not being on a shelf. The games or experience team sounds a bit naff. That started about 3.5 years ago when I joined the company. There was some contract work done on the app before then, but it was just a test, really. So all the early stuff, I built all the prototype stuff myself and the CTO, sort of built all the hardware and software prototypes, really. We're now, the team I'm part of at the moment is now 13, about 13 permanent members of staff. 2 contractors, and we're probably hiring up to, I don't know, that's a made-up number, actually, in case my CEO is watching, but about that number next year. The way we're moving the structure of the team, obviously when you have a really small team, we focused on sort of everyone had to chip in and build everything. Moving forwards, we're splitting into more practical teams where one team basically builds all the SDK, and does all the research tools, smaller projects that might be smaller experiences, but generally smaller things. Then there's a core experience team building larger games and experiences. An EDU team which I'm hoping to form next year, and a web team connecting it all to the web services. I thought this slide was probably important just to give you an idea of what this sort of app entails compared to a normal game. So this stuff is all the normal stuff for a game, right? And there's a few more boxes there that also relate to a normal game. But we build the app in Unity, as it's just too much time and effort to roll our own stuff, really, and it allows us to prototype quickly as well. But essentially, we have the normal app and game engine stuff, everything you need to have a functional game or app built on top of Unity. And then a little bit more uncommon, but still fairly common in big apps would be like a tight web service integration. For login and sessions and achievements and all that sort of stuff. All the analytics, so we try and do a lot of analytics. For us, that's important because not only do we track everything they're doing to try and find out what's fun, what's shit, but we also track what the robot's doing, how far it's walked, whether gearboxes are broken or things like that. So we do loads of analytics. A little bit more uncommon would be the idea that we build multiple experiences. As we're moving forwards, these will be larger and more compelling experiences. At the moment, they're bigger than sort of mini games, but they're not 20-hour games or anything like that. What we actually focus on is sort of repeatability, competitiveness, and procedural content. So we also have a lot of UX work. So what we tried to build is a game. I think it's quite easy for games, especially when targeting PC and stuff, to just assume that people are gamers and assume they don't mind a crap user interface. For a sort of a high-end app and incorporating things like augmented reality and all sorts of stuff like that, has to really feed back to the user really well. So we focus on that a lot. I realise I'm sort of going on a bit already. Hardware interaction, pretty rare. There's not many apps that do that. So that's a huge part of our app, a stable method of communication and working with a physical robot. There's so many states it sits in, different walking gaits, all sorts of stuff like that. I'll maybe go into detail in a sec. and all the AR technology. So wrapping things like, we've now moved to AR Kit and AR Core. So when we do AR games, like you can it detects like the ground plane and builds up a play space that you can play in, and we track the robot. But there's also all the other stuff around that, like when you move the screen away from the robot, how do you know where the robot was, and how do you tell the user where other stuff is in the scene, and how do you build the play space? All sorts of stuff like that we do. Very quickly go through the slides. I think I'm short on time. So also, like all the teams have an input on other teams. So because we all work in parallel, and we've really improved that in the last sort of 6 months. I think when we expanded rapidly, like it was difficult to do, but now we've put a lot of effort into working really collaboratively together. So for example, the games team have a lot of input on the way infrared's dealt with. So it's 4 transceivers around the robot for like inter-robot communication. Inter-robot communication, sorry. And as well as like through the app. It's like movement and gate control, BLE requirements, and the protocol itself, like a high-level protocol that sits on top of BLE. And that, like making the robot useful to track, detail on the robot and the shape and lighting and diffusion of the light in the head, and even down to like packaging and what like how the robot's like used and picked up for the first time out the box, and how the manual reads and the translations of that. So like all the departments have a lot of influence on each other. So we want to build experiences for this robot, not just have these really lightweight things like drive your robot around and that's it, or put it on a shelf. So there are a lot of restrictions, one of which is the robot can only walk around on the floor, right? So in terms of like a $250 robot, that's actually super cool. There's 12 degrees of freedom in it. It's really like, it's got loads of character, moves really well, moves quickly. I think like on the right sort of floor surface, it can do about 0.6 meters per second. So it's pretty quick and agile. But in terms of a video game character, that's pretty slow and problematic, right? So that is a problem. Also, like you can't just use like different, any game mechanic you want because of that. So it can also be picked up, turned off, legs pulled off, thrown against the wall, eaten by the dog, whatever. We kind of have to handle all that in the game, right? Like at all times, especially in multiplayer, that's even more difficult. High entry cost, pretty high anyway compared to a video game. Because of that cost, it's quite likely to just be you, right? Like, so what's the chance of getting like your 8 friends that you play online games with to go and buy 8 robots? But if there are more than just you, then shit, that better be a good game if you spent like $1,000 on robots. Also, no critical mass for multiplayer. So, so League of Legends with like 20 million players or 50 million players, whatever it is now. If you log on and want to play a game, it'll find you the exact person that like has the same hair color as you and stuff to play against straight away. Obviously, with like even at several thousand or tens of thousands of robots, if you go online and want a game at that exact point in time, finding an opponent is going to be pretty tricky. Players also may not be gamers, right? They might be hobbyists, or they might just like gadgets, or it might be a random Christmas present. They'll try your shit out, but it might not. It needs to be like propositioned to them that it like not as if you were a gamer. We also have to stick like super tightly to hardware release deadlines, which is pretty tricky. An example of this sort of like multiplayer stuff is we've built loads of different prototypes, including like a zombie bomb game with like where you can use like 50 robots, and like it's like tag and you explode and you pass it on and etc. And it's super cool, but like, is there any point in us like spending like a couple of months polishing that for release? Probably not. How many people have 50 robots, or even 10, I suppose? Or like we actually built a co-op game as well. I don't know if anyone's played co-op, like where you control all like the legs and like arms and joints and stuff of like a side-scrolling character, and it's super difficult. And we had like 4-player multiplayer co-op, so everyone gets a leg and you try and walk the robot. And it was super cool, but also actually like problematic with joint damage because you're putting the robot in super awkward poses and stuff like that. So it's really non-trivial to build some of this stuff. Building experiences. So like, what do? So we could build a purely physical experience where you basically, it's like a thin client kind of on your app, and then direct control and feedback from the robot. So that's pretty cool. You get a really tight feedback loop with the robot, and it feels really good. But like visual cues only from the robot. So it's quite restrictive if you're used to building video games and you want explosions or whatever on the robot. You can't do that at all. So it's difficult to give the user that sort of feedback We use, in a physical example, we use infrared. Say if you're building a conventional game, we use infrared for targeting, so a robot might know where another robot is and the distance from it and stuff with infrared. But that only gives you like approximate like distance and approximate direction, right? This is not precise like, like direction and distance. We also have superport, dead reckoning, and spatial guarantees here. So, we might integrate over the, data from the IMUs just to know where the robot is, but that's it's massively problematic and inaccurate. And also, like we don't know where the robot starts, so it's only relative to its original position. And no control over the play space, right? How do we know how big the living room is that the user's playing in, or if they're outside, or if it's underwater, or whatever? So physical experiences can be really cool, but you have to think super carefully about what sort of game you're building. So we just use AR, right, and have explosions everywhere, and it'd be super cool, except for the fact that AI is still kind of a bit janky. Well, no, that's probably unfair, but it's definitely new, and it's definitely not perfect. It has extreme hardware requirements, so yeah, sure, it runs great on my iPhone 10, but like, a 3-year-old Android phone, yeah, good luck with that. So it cuts off some of our users, right, when we decided to switch to markerless AR. But the solution we had before was just not worth it. So it's better to cut off users in that case. That was the decision we made, than to have a sort of average solution. Also, even on like modern phones, because we like hammer the CPU so much, not so much the GPU, but the CPU so much from tracking the ground and tracking the robot and all that sort of stuff that it overheats, and we have to be really careful about like limiting frame rate and stuff like that to try and not get them to overheat. Again, have this huge tech problem with AR. To get it working really well is difficult, and again, the UX. So, even just building the play space and stuff is quite difficult, and we have to make that really usable for a completely, a user that's played like match 3 or something. Difficult rendering and collision interactions with the robot. Obviously, we can't render behind the robot. The only way we do that is if we could really precisely mat out or cut out the robot, which is really difficult. And collisions, yeah, we sort of have a sort of bounding box to do that, and it's difficult to make it look really good. And actually, even though we know the play space and we can control it, we have similar problems to what you might have in VR. So whereas in VR, you're stuck in a static box and you have to try and make that compelling. We can walk around. You can go all the way around the house and you can build up a play space there, and that's super cool, right? Except for the fact that we don't know how big their house is. They might have like a 3-foot by 3-foot living room, and you've got to make the game sort of work in that. Or they might have a fucking mansion, and who knows? And then you have to build a game where you can sort of additively put stuff into that world, so that it doesn't all spawn straight away, or whatever game you're building doesn't all happen immediately, because they might not have just gone, oh yeah, that's cool, and started the game. So that's pretty tricky. What do we do and what do we focus on? So one of the things that we've really focused on with this release is the feel and the connectivity with the robot. So this slide up here is a good example of that connectivity, where when you're connected to the robot, you're doing this battle game, which is one of our core games where they sort of battle out against each other. And for certain builds in it, certain classes that you might play with, it requires different weapons and add-ons and shields and stuff like that to make it work. So we have this super cool UI where you take off a shield and it tells you it needs a shield on that leg slot. You click it on, it immediately tells you that you've attached that shield and what your stat changes are and stuff like that. Also, in terms of the physical feedback loop, playing animations right on the robot and getting the movement and gate control and lighting of the robot to be super precise and super good feel when you press those buttons, that it happens exactly the way it should. And it all works really nicely together. And then in AR, combining that with the sounds, the visuals, the good controls and timings of the AR stuff, so that it all fits together really nicely, and it all feels really good. So we focus really, really a lot on that. And even with all this investment into making AR a compelling experience, if it turns out as we carry on that AR just is a dead end for us in terms of it's just not popular enough, or we can't quite make the experience we want, we'll probably cut it and come back to it when it's improved, or when we can invest enough in the technology. So you have to be we have to be quite harsh with our decisions on that. Another thing is thinking broadly, so non-game ideas. I think they've got a bit more on the next slide, so I won't go into too much detail there. User-generated content to keep users coming back and generating their own stuff. and like loads and loads of prototyping, even more so than on a normal game. On a normal game, most studios now would just like prototype, and then pick a few good things and try them out and then throw them away, even late into the process to make it. And but obviously with us, like building a game is even more difficult than a normal game because we've got the robot. Everything's got to work with the robot and designed around the robot. So we have to prototype more and cut earlier. And we haven't done enough for that historically, but we're really focusing on improving that. And loads of user testing because the UX is so hard to do to make it communicate properly to the user on the app, like what's happening with the robot and vice versa. We have to focus a lot on getting like a lot of feedback from users. An example of that is we had a testing session where when you build your play space, it sort of tells you to like tap on the floor to choose like the play space you want to play in. And we had users go and like tap on the floor in front of it, and we were like, what the fuck? But yeah, it was our fault and it was stupid, but we just didn't think about it because we were so wrapped up in it. So yeah, like almost at the end there. So yeah. One real takeaway for us is throwing away preconceptions about what games should be like with physical hardware. So by that, I sort of touched on it, but you know, like something that might be a super cool idea for a video game, like really cool, and you think, oh, it's going to work with the Mechamon, it's going to be great. And then you build it, and actually, like, you know, the PlayStation space makes it feel too small or too cramped, and, you know, like maybe it doesn't quite feel right, or it's just like you can't make the physical feedback loop, or like one problem we worked on a lot with the non-AR battle is to make the user look at the screen less and make the controls so natural and so much feedback on the robot that they don't have to look at the screen too much. And maybe you can't do that with that game or whatever. So that's really important to think about. Focus on the good interactions. I talked about that quite a lot. And that example of clipping on and off hardware is a good example of that. And yeah, something that we're fortunate to be doing now is separating teams working on like content and tech and stuff like that. I mean, it's really obvious stuff, that last point. But coming from a startup where we're constantly trying to produce prototypes for investors and things like that, and marketing and sales, like it's really easy to get distracted. You know, you can be like building a game, and you know, during a week you might lose a week because you know, like they need specific builds or things like that. And no amount of like good build process will completely solve that. Yeah, so just a quick thing on the company, like lessons from the company. So I know, like I removed some detail on this because obviously there were a few talks on it earlier. But so like our company is pretty much VC funded. And it gives you a lot of flexibility. It's not like having a publisher where they're super breathing down your neck all the time, and you get all the control you want. But it's disadvantages in the sense that you spend, like our CEO and now CFO as well, spend a lot of time on the road trying to raise funds. Basically, a CEO's job for a startup is you raise all the time. You literally spend pretty much every day raising money, and you start raising for the next round. So that's a huge overhead and drain on the CEO. But you do build up a lot of air miles. So advantages, though, from VC funding. We have a really good lead VC from our seed round, and they give us like super cool feedback all the time and really good help. It's basically like a really competent publisher. They just have this amazing network of people. They run events, and it's like super useful. So yeah, I think someone mentioned, like the person talking about VC funding earlier mentioned that at the start they just took, they were happy to look at whatever was going, and then, you know, as they went further on, they were like, oh, actually, like, let's be more specific about these VCs. Yeah, growing from 5 to 60 people in like, I think that was in about 2 years, is like super hard. You know, your roles change, especially if you were there from the start. I used to be a programmer. I don't think I am anymore. Yeah, you hire shit people, you hire great people. Oh, it's really intense when you're changing that much. Another little video. So in context, this is a video we actually produced for Apple when they asked us to show the connection process and AR process really quickly in like a short video. So our video guy like went straight into the office and just made this sort of last minute. But I actually thought it was kind of cool way to show like a really brief little slice into the app. Plus he's got really nice hands, so I quite like to show them on screen. So yeah, that's this process. Unfortunately, it doesn't do anything interesting like actually take stuff on and off, but you can see like what it allows you to do with that connectivity process. And here's like our process at the moment, and we keep iterating this to make it as simple as possible. But here's the start of the AR experience. I think at this point he realizes he's going to have to move around the room like the instructions say and not actually stay still. So you can see there, we sort of determine what the ground plane is and start building like a play space around your robot. So it like automatically finds the robot in the scene. You just have to sort of validate it. And it does a very brief amount of orientation calibration to make sure we know what's the front of the robot. Pretty intense music for a demo for Apple, I think. They must have loved it when they were reviewing the video. So like we're spawning stuff into the play space there. Obviously, like in the game, it actually like expands. Like as you expand the play space, it will spawn new things and new challenges in it. So this is an example of like a virtual enemy, like shooting the physical robot, and then it cuts to the end of it where Ryan has got himself killed pretty embarrassingly. So yeah, so just again, like that's virtual there and physical there. What I found, like I've been doing demos recently to investors and stuff, and I tend to find myself like I'm so used to picking up the robot after doing a demo that I like we have virtual only mode as well now to like get in users, and I go to like pick up the virtual robot. I'm like, what am I doing? Cool. So last slide. Yeah. So it wouldn't be right like a talk like this if I didn't say we were recruiting and always looking for new people. I know it's like a super generic thing to say. So we'll probably be quite heavily recruiting in the new year. But obviously we're always open to speculative applications. So if you're like super good at something and you think, hey, I want to do this and I'm really good, just like send me an email and well, we'll definitely consider it. And also, like I know the industry at the moment is kind of moving towards offering a lot more help and mentorship and trying to like improve the network, especially for new people. So I'm always happy to. I'm not saying I know everything by any means, but I'm always happy to help or like mentor someone or discuss ideas if that's of interest. And yeah, Twitter, LinkedIn, my email address if you want. On the right, you can see it's like a couple of guys in the office. Built this arcade cabinet the other day, which is pretty cool. So it's like a mecha arcade cabinet. And you can see our CSGO map of our office here as well, which is, I think, pretty important for any company to build, which is still a work in progress. We don't actually have like a helicopter in our real office or outside our real office. It's just sort of cut off to the left here. But there is one in our CSGO office. We do have like crates next to our office manager's desk, which we're hoping to label with Amazon to show like what her daily job is, just taking everyone's post in every day. Cool. Yeah, so that's the end. So I don't know if we've got time for questions or anything there, or feel free to just... Okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, oh yeah, you did tell me that before. Yeah, so feel free to grab me straight after this or at the drinks in a sec. But thanks very much.